Welcome to another episode of the Whole Note Podcast. My name is Shenyang Kim, and today we will be joined by violinist Stephen Tavani. Stephen currently serves as Assistant Concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra, a position he has held since 2018. Prior to his arrival in Cleveland, Stephen served as Concertmaster of the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. We sat down together as Stephen shared with us a little bit about his journey and how it led him to Cleveland. He shared with us insight into his studies with the great violinist Ida Kavafian at the Curtis Institute of Music. Finally, he gave us a sneak peek into his life in the Cleveland Orchestra and all that entails. Thank you so much again for joining us today. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. We hope you enjoy. Thanks. Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Shenyang. So great to be here. Really looking forward to this.
So, Stephen, you have an extensive history of working as concertmaster of various orchestras, having been guest concertmaster of many in America, and you obviously are currently the assistant concertmaster of the Cleveland Orchestra. At what point in your development did you decide that you wanted to commit your musical life to orchestra, and did winning a titled position always come with that pursuit?
Yeah, so I'll back up even a little bit further. So right around when I was 12, I decided I wanted to be a professional violinist. My teacher in a lesson asked me, my Suzuki teacher asked me, what do you want to do with your violin playing? And for me, it was super obvious. And I just said, well, I'm going to be a professional, obviously. And I remember my mom asking me, or talking to me after that lesson, saying like, "Really, you never told me that." And but for me, I don't know. My older brother is also a violinist, and it was just I knew that's what I wanted to do. Now, at that point, I had really no clue what that really meant. I just knew, about Itzhak Perlman, basically. So, but pretty quickly, I think I realized I wasn't going to be the next Itzhak Perlman, which is good. I think I'm glad I learned that sooner rather than later. But I remember my first time at Aspen Music Festival when I was 17 was really an eye-opening experience. I realized how many amazing musicians there are out there and what the level really is. That was my first time playing a really high level orchestra. And I remember playing in Mahler 5. I'd never played any Mahler. I was in the second violins. I'd never played second violin. I was totally lost. And I couldn't believe I couldn't play a single note of this piece without, I really had to practice. But it was such an inspiring experience to play that piece, such an incredible piece. So anyway, I think right about end of high school and into my college years, I already kind of had my eyes on trying to be a concertmaster because I realized that well, first of all, I loved orchestra music and I wanted to be able to do that, but I enjoyed playing concertmaster and also the other opportunities to do solo and chamber music that brings with it. So yeah, pretty early on in late high school and early college, that's what I was aiming for. So I actually in all my college years in my college orchestra and also the outside youth orchestra, I was always doing concertmaster auditions. And I mean, even back in middle school, in high school, I was interested in that. So,
yeah. Well, and I mean, it's funny because I think a lot of us as musicians, we grow up loving the orchestral repertoire, but for many of us, it's not until later on, maybe college or even masters, where people kind of think, okay, maybe orchestra is the way to go. But it seems like you've kind of figured it out earlier on. So.
Yeah, and I mean, I really didn't have a huge knowledge of the orchestral repertoire. I think that Mahler 5, I just remember, as a freshman in college, people talking about Mahler, and I never really listened all the way through or anything, but then I played Mahler too my freshman year, and that was like a life-changing experience, and experience all this amazing orchestral repertoire definitely like fueled that fire of me to want to be an orchestra musician, because I realized
Mm,
like, oh, I want to play all this amazing music.
yeah. 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 And I think, with any position where you're in the front stand, that's as a string player, I feel like that's oftentimes when you feel like it's the most intimate or the most chamber music like, because you're like very engaged with the conductor and obviously the other section members. So I could definitely understand why you would be so passionate about that.
Mhm.
Um, so moving forward a little bit, I understand you studied with the great violinist Ida Kavafian at the Curtis Institute of Music. Can you share with us a little bit of just the musical imprint that she left on your life and how she influenced the way you look at music today?
Sure, yeah. So Ida's amazing and really was so key to my development as a musician, especially where I was as a violinist and musician when I started with her. So, I mean, I've had a lot of amazing, influential teachers throughout my education. Um, in in middle school, I was studying with a lady named Shirley Givens, who was on faculty at Peabody and also in Juilliard Prep. But I took lessons with her at Peabody Prep, and she was fantastic. Then I switched in the last 2 years of high school. I was studying privately with Aaron Rosen, who became like my hero, my violin hero, and to this day is one of my favorite violinists. Maybe the most beautiful violin sound ever, I think. So he was always an inspiration. And then, so I went to Colburn for my undergrad. I know you asked about Ida, but I'm just giving
Mhm.
you kind of my path to her to tell you why she was so pivotal for me. So then at Colburn, I studied with Robert Lipset, who helped me so much, and he really built my technique and uh, just gave me the tools and the practice tools to really bring my violin playing to the next level. And he was just so patient and yet demanding. He demands a really high level from all his students, and I it's really amazing what he's able to do in raising students' levels. So after Colburn, I met Ida because I did the Michael Hill violin competition
Mhm.
in my junior or senior year, and she was on the jury, and I met her afterwards, and I was really inspired and impressed with her and with her students and her recordings, and so I wanted to study with her. I was lucky enough to study with her at Curtis, but I would say um, the way that she helped me so much was, I think, the way she approaches violin technique is always um, always from a musical point of view. So
Mhm.
it's never technique purely for technique. It's always trying to accomplish some musical goal. But using that, but she's, I think, really fantastic at talking about like breaking down what you want to do musically in terms of technique. So how would you get this musical character across? I mean, and also thinking in terms of musical character and the what's the basic point of the music or the phrase that you're playing. what's the most important thing that you're trying to communicate? Because we're so busy as string players, so many things to think about, intonation and bow control and vibrato and everything, that I think you can easily kind of lose the main point
Mm,
of like what the music is about. And she's always thinking about that main point. What is this music about? And what should it be doing? And that was just so helpful for me. She's
mm,
amazing.
mm. Yeah, and I think that dialogue and that idea of always thinking about the musical purpose is so crucial, especially kind of like what you were saying. Um, it's so easy for us to get lost in our fingers,
Mhm.
especially when we're performing. And I'm curious, like, does she just try, like, when she would talk about the music with you, would she try to inspire you with different ideas or imagery? Like, what were some of the things that you guys really dug into?
Um, I mean, I think a lot of it is phrasing. Like she's just so naturally musical, and
Yeah.
is always thinking about phrasing. Like where is the phrase going? Yeah, but also like the mood, like the character I mentioned.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of forgot exactly what your question was just then.
Oh, no, no, no. It's fine. And I was just curious as to like how she got her students to think more about the music, just like in terms of encouraging different ideas in their heads or imagery or just inspirations.
Yeah, yeah, I guess it depends on the piece, how she might encourage different. I think, well, one thing that's fun is she has lots of great stories with other great musicians she's worked with. So which is kind of like a tradition of, I think, string playing, especially like you tell the stories of the great musicians you played with because it's like carrying on that tradition. So I'm thinking about playing Bartok concerto for her, and she told stories about playing Bartok with Janos Starker,
Mm,
and like kind of his approach to the like Hungarian rhythm. Yadam. So yeah, that type of thing is like taking the piece, whatever piece of music, in a big context, in terms of style and uh, the composer and that sort of thing. So
okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's neat. So moving forward, I know before you started working full time in orchestra, I know that you had competed in various big international competitions like Sibelius, Queen Elizabeth, and Michael Hill you mentioned earlier. Can you talk a little bit about how that preparation and that work helped prepare you for your life in the Cleveland Orchestra?
Sure. So yeah, so I did. Yeah, those three you mentioned were really the big three that I did. At first, I did Queen Elizabeth competition when I was 19 or 20. I can't remember. Maybe I was 20 when I went to the competition. Um, uh, and then let's see. Yeah, then Michael Hill was when I met Ida. That was my junior year, so I was probably 21. And then let's see, Sibelius was when I was at Curtis and I was grad school, so probably 25 or something like that. Maybe no, 23. Anyway, so I think it's interesting you asked how it prepared me for my Cleveland Orchestra, and I don't know if it's directly linked in that sense to like how I play in the orchestra, but in terms of my development as a musician, um, it pushes you so far preparing for an international competition like that. Just knowing you have this humongous repertoire list, and even oftentimes the first round that you have to play is a decent chunk of music. But just trying to juggle that much music just pushes you, pushed me farther than I'd ever gone. And I realized actually after, well, so the Queen Elizabeth, actually, I think it might be going on right now again.
Yeah.
Generally, like not that aware of that thing, but anymore. But they that competition accepts a lot of people into the first round. So I think there are about 70 violinists in the first round when I did it.
Mm.
So I went and I prepared as well as I could. I think I was a sophomore, and just so much music. And I played the first round and didn't advance, which is fine. But I learned from that experience that I needed to treat competitions as just to use them for as a personal goal rather than like trying to win. Because if you're trying to win a competition, the odds are you're going to be disappointed. There's only one person that's not going to be disappointed, and everybody else is going to have some amount of disappointment, right? So I think it's more healthy to go into it in terms of your personal goal and using it as a motivation, which I find is incredibly effective, because you have to play for all these famous violinists on the jury. A lot of times it's very visible at a competition that big. A lot of people around the world can watch what you're doing. So yeah, and for Sibelius competition, for example, I remember the first round. Everybody had to play the first movement of Bartók's Solo Sonata, which honestly is the most stressful thing I've ever had to do as a violinist. That piece is so incredibly difficult. It's amazing, and I ended up having a lot of fun with it. But what was stressful was knowing I had to perform this thing, and not only perform it, but perform it at that level of an international competition. And I think it went well. Actually, that recording's on my YouTube channel, and I did advance to the semifinals in that competition. So, but yeah, that was an example I was telling of how it pushed me farther than I probably would have never, made myself learn that piece, just because that would take a lot of self-motivation unless you have that. So using the competition as the self-motivation, I think, is the most useful way to view them. And so in how it prepared me for the orchestra, I think is just just raising my level and that much more, preparing for each one of those, I would say. And also getting used to juggling that amount of repertoire. It's solo rep, so it's different. But in Cleveland Orchestra, we play so much repertoire. So in that sense, it was helpful.
Yeah, and I'm curious because obviously, kind of like what you mentioned before, all of these competitions now are live streamed for pretty much the whole world to see. So there's that added pressure to that. Would you say that having to handle that kind of pressure helped prepare you for auditions? Did it make it feel easier, or is it all difficult?
I guess in some ways yes, but in some ways no. And the reason why is because I think auditions, especially when they're behind a screen, which pretty much all of them are now, it's such a unique experience that is so different than a regular performance. So even though I had done some international competitions, and this, the nerves are there, you have an audience and it's a performance. And, I love performing for people. Like that's what, so, it's such a big reason why I am a violinist, is because I love to share, you know, share what I'm playing, the music that I'm playing. But with the auditions though, with the screen, I remember my first audition, um, the screen really threw me off. I just got so nervous, and it was such a bizarre experience, and I had no idea what to think of, like how I played, and I didn't advance. So because I'm the type of person, like pretty much most performances, I try to enjoy myself. So even if it's not perfect, I will usually come out being like, wow, that was fun, like, whereas an audition, it's not really about that. So yeah, I could talk more about auditions if you want, but like, and about my Cleveland audition, or we could come back later. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, you can, yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. And just quickly, because, going back to the dichotomy between a performance and an audition, yeah, I mean, everyone gets nervous for a performance, obviously, especially when you're backstage. But I think there's something very human about going on stage and seeing people and knowing that you're there to serve a purpose. And it makes it very uh personal, and it makes it almost, it alleviates a lot of the nerves, I think, personally, as opposed to the audition process. Like you were saying, especially in America, it's behind screens, and so it's almost like a test taking endeavor almost. And so yeah, please share with us a little bit more about your audition with Cleveland and how that went.
Sure. Yeah. So I won my current position on my third try auditioning for Cleveland Orchestra. So and I think total up to that point, I had taken, I think it was like my 11th audition, something like that. And one of those, I had one that was the Chamber Orchestra of Philadelphia. So well, two things I think that really helped the one that I did win. One, first of all, I was living in Cleveland studying in the Concertmaster Academy, and seeing the orchestra every week that year made a huge difference. I mean, Cleveland Orchestra is such a unique culture and way of playing, that I found that was invaluable. I mean, yeah, so valuable to hear the orchestra and experience that. And I felt like I was immersed in the style, so that helped me in the preparation. Also, my teacher at the time, former concertmaster, William Prusel, I remember he told me before the audition, I asked him about maybe nerves or something, and I think he could tell I was pretty nervous about it. And he told me, think of it basically like as a job interview. Like, you are just showing what you can do and seeing if you're qualified for the job. And like, it's so simple. And the other thing he told me is, you'd have nothing to lose at an audition. You have a lot to gain, but you really don't have anything to lose. So I think that helped me in kind of removing myself a little bit in the audition playing, because I'm the type of person that I like to put all of myself into what I'm playing all the time. But I think in an audition situation, it can be helpful to kind of scale back a little bit in that department, to just be a little bit more cool, to play in a more like perfect way. So those two things, I think, helped me so much in that audition. And I mean, of course, there's also just luck. Like, there's always amazing players at auditions. So yeah, just I was incredibly blessed and lucky to get to win that audition.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Mr. Prusel. I'm curious, did you play for anybody else in the orchestra in preparation for the audition?
No,
Mm.
not no. I mean, I worked on a bunch of all the standard concertmaster excerpts with him that year, but a lot of the standard section excerpts. And he's amazing at that. And his album of standard orchestral excerpts is fantastic. And any violinist who's taking an audition, I would highly recommend studying that. He gives you really a lot of amazing tips on a lot of the standard ones, whether it's Don Juan or Mendelssohn Scherzo, Schumann Scherzo, a lot of those.
Yeah. And yeah, just quickly going back to the orchestra and just how you were able to learn from listening to them every week. Yeah, I think, studying at CIM, that's one of the true blessings of studying at that school is really just having the orchestra at your disposal on a weekly basis. And I remember just one of the first times I heard them play, and I was just so gravitated towards their strings and just how pristine and clean and together they were as a string section. And I didn't realize that that was even possible in an orchestra, to be honest. It
Yeah.
was fantastic.
Yeah, I remember the same thing. Like I remember hearing these rubatos that the
Yeah,
orchestra would do, either following the soloist or just following itself,
yeah,
playing together. And I remember
yeah,
thinking, wow, like it's really possible to play that together. Like
yeah.
I didn't know. Like I never heard anything like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I feel like you guys are like, because I know you guys do this fairly regularly, but I feel like Cleveland is one of the only orchestras that can pull off playing like a Beethoven string quartet as a string orchestra. I just think that's one of the coolest things that you guys do.
It is really cool. It's really special. And in some ways it's a lot more efficient than in a quartet because you just have the conductor to make all the decisions. You don't have to argue for hours. But I mean that uh but yeah, the level of listening and refinement in the strings is amazing. I mean the whole orchestra is really amazing. But and there's a decent amount of people in the orchestra that have quartets within the orchestra. Like I have a quartet, just so amazing, fantastic players. And every time I play with them, I'm just amazed. They're so easy to play with, and like I've done a couple things with students, or like a mix of students and professionals, and then I'll come back to my quartet. And I'm like, oh, it's just so easy, so easy to play with you guys. So yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it too, is a lot of people do enjoy playing chamber music or even come from chamber music backgrounds.
So now kind of getting into the meat and potatoes of your work. Can you talk about what a typical week in the Cleveland Orchestra looks like for you?
Sure. Um, yeah, I mean, the kind of most normal week would be we start on Tuesday morning. And usually on Tuesday morning, we would start with the big piece of the week, Rite of Spring or Symphony or whatever it is. We will, that might be the only thing on that rehearsal. Depending how long it is, we might not get through the whole thing. So that's 2.5 hours on Tuesday morning, and then Wednesday we have a double. So Wednesday morning and then afternoon. Usually the afternoon is the concerto, and then Thursday morning is the dress rehearsal, and Thursday evening is usually the first concert. And then we might have one on either Friday morning or Friday evening, Saturday evening, Sunday afternoon. Usually every once in a while, like there will be 4 concerts in a weekend. A lot of times it's 2 or 3. Just depends on the repertoire and the week, and how many tickets they're going to sell. But so but depending, some weeks is way crazier than that. We might have extra rehearsals for something else coming up, like a tour or the opera, or we might have two different programs in the same week, especially if it's like education concert that's going on at the same time, or a one-off, like maybe a one rehearsal, one concert type of like a movie that we do sometimes, or like the Martin Luther King concert we do. So like those types of things added on to the normal schedule can, make it so it can be a pretty crazy week, because often for, especially playing in the first violins, like even those like lighter programs, we might have just a gazillion notes, and so, so yeah, it can be really crazy at times. And we're always playing huge rep. I mean, even Blossom, which is a lighter schedule, our summer season, in terms of, usually we start rehearsing on Thursday or even Friday for the concert on Saturday or Sunday. I mean, even then, though, we play huge rep, like real symphonies, concertos, it's big stuff. So it's actually really fun though, because when you get in the swing of it, it's like, it doesn't feel like as big of a deal as it might. I mean, first of all, because the orchestra is so amazing and they can play anything. But personally, preparing, like, you kind of get in the swing of preparing this super hard rep all the time, and it's fun. I mean, we play amazing repertoire. So yeah, it's let's see what else. I mean, the touring can get especially crazy, because sometimes we take 3 or 4 programs on a tour. So like, I remember the tour that got canceled because of COVID. One of the last rehearsals we were supposed to do, I wish I had taken a picture of the rehearsal schedule, because it was so absurd. It was like complete Romeo and Juliet Prokofiev ballet. On top of that, like 3 or 4 other symphonies, and we were supposed to rehearse those all in one rehearsal. Like, I mean, it was clear, like, we had played it all before, and we had rehearsed it all before, but this was the final one, and it was just funny to see that amount of music on one rehearsal. I mean, he would have just touched each one just a little bit, but we didn't have that rehearsal because of COVID. But that's just like a picture of how, how much rep we might be doing at one time per tour. So
That's a lot. I'm curious for you personally, how do you juggle like preparing all that repertoire? Like, what does your day-to-day personal practice look like in preparation for not just the orchestra, but I'm sure you have other chamber projects. You mentioned you're in a quartet, your chamber projects, and I'm sure you try to do other things on the side. Like, how do you juggle all of that personally?
Well, everybody's different. It depends. For me, like, let's say I'm going to go play a concerto somewhere. For that, like, I try to plan as far out as I can, because I want to, have it memorized and like really like so solid. And that's just like another level of preparation. That So that I'll try to be, preparing months and months and months in advance for that, especially if it's a piece I've never played. In terms of the orchestra stuff, like I was saying, it's so kind of relentless in the amount of repertoire that we play personally, and especially as a first violinist. I will say again, we have just by far the most notes of anybody in the orchestra. It's not even close. I think we played 3 times as many notes as anybody else. But anyway, that's beside the point. But because of that, I find personally I can't actually look too far ahead. Otherwise, it's kind of overwhelming, and it's not even that helpful, because I might forget everything I practice. So like, usually, to be honest with you, I'm practicing 1 week ahead. So I'm like, my goal is to be ready like 100% at the first rehearsal of the week, of any given piece. But yeah, like if I was gonna play a solo with the orchestra, which I'll tell you in a second, I did kind of once, but that I would see way far out in the future and have in my mind and be preparing for. So like I got to play Scheherazade with Cleveland Orchestra, which was amazing, like absolutely the highlight of my career. But the way it happened was I one of the two of the other concertmasters at the time were on vacation, so they weren't playing. So it was me and another concertmaster. I was sitting second chair, and the night before the rehearsal, she got sick, and I got a call like, "Oh, you're gonna play Scheherazade the next morning." It was like 9 p.m. Thursday night, so I had to go in Friday morning for the rehearsal, play Scheherazade, and then the concert was on Saturday, and, and it was nuts. But I mean, that's one that I prepared, since I was like in middle school. I played that, so I played it so much, so much. So I was ready, and it was so much fun to do. But so in that case, I didn't have the time to like. If I had known about it, I would have been practicing, like crazy. But yeah, so I think for the most normal stuff that I do playing in the section, essentially unless it's something really crazy hard that I've never played, I might try to look at that a little bit earlier, but usually it's just 1 week in advance.
That Scheherazade story, that's a nice segue into what I was going to ask you next, actually. So for those that might not know, what is an assistant concertmaster and what does that role look like on a given week?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so that Scheherazade story is kind of in a nutshell, like what it means to be an assistant concertmaster. I think that's your job, is you're ready to go play concertmaster if somebody gets sick. And so it's kind of like, for if somebody is not a musician, at my church or whatever, if I have to like try to explain what my job is, a lot of times I say it's kind of like being a second or third or fourth string quarterback in the
Oh.
NFL. Except the difference is you're on the field. You're on the field the whole time, and you're just not the quarterback. You're like kind of not quite. So it's not a perfect analogy, but yeah. So so yeah, I think being ready to play the big solos, step in and play concertmaster, and then just if you're setting, it's interesting. I think every seat up at the front is kind of unique, like especially like the first three and maybe four. So like obviously the concertmaster has the lead, and I find when I'm sitting second chair, in some ways it's really challenging because I try to not move physically too much when I'm playing in second chair, because first of all, this orchestra is so sensitive to that sort of thing, to leading. So even when I play concertmaster, you don't need to do a lot of leading in this orchestra, I find. I mean, I don't have a lot of experience playing here, but the times that I did, I mean, playing actually concertmaster here is what I meant. So that thing about the second chair, I find like I try to kind of get out of the way, not be in the way of the concertmaster or the principal second, and not give any extra information, like in terms of physical movement. And other than that, just trying to help, the concertmaster with whatever he or she might need, page turns and like things like that, and just supporting. A lot of it is just supporting, and then the third chair, you're also not leading, but you might lead a tiny bit if necessary. And fourth chair is more like second chair. So yeah, they're all different. Yeah, but the main thing I would say is being ready to step in if necessary.
Yeah, and I'm curious because every orchestra is a little bit different with the titles. And I believe with I believe with Cleveland, there's concertmaster, associate concertmaster, and then several. Is there a couple or assistant concertmasters? How does that all
Yes.
work?
Yeah. So technically we have five concertmaster positions. They're not all currently filled,
Mm,
but if they were all filled, there'd be the number one is the concertmaster, number two is associate concertmaster. Sorry, first associate concertmaster. And for whatever reason, often in this orchestra, the first associate concertmaster would actually sit third chair. So that I guess the idea is that whoever that second chair person, Amy Lee, right
mm.
now, uh, would stay in that spot. So if the number one leaves, then the like she's still there, and then I guess to just have a little bit more continuity. So yeah, the second in line is the first associate concertmaster, but he or she would sit third chair. And then there's associate concertmaster who's Amy Lee, and then Jessica Lee is assistant, and I'm assistant.
Mhm.
So right now, the for the one and two positions are vacant. So
Mhm.
it's just Amy, Jessica, and me.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, and I know that it was just announced a few weeks ago that Jessica was also going to be stepping down from the orchestra to pursue teaching full time. So I guess you and Amy will have to hold down the fort next year, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, actually, I can tell you. I think I'm allowed to tell you that there was an audition. They did hire somebody for the first associate concertmaster position, but it hasn't been announced
Sure.
who it is, and I don't think I'm definitely not supposed to say who it is.
Yeah,
Hopefully, I was
yeah,
allowed to say that they hired
yeah.
somebody. I don't think that's too bad.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
well, so I mean, more or less, you guys will be juggling different roles throughout the next year.
yeah.
So, are there any concerts? Because I know the season has been announced. Are there any concerts that you know for sure you'll be having to lead as concertmaster, or is that kind of
No, like I mean, the nature of my position right now, just because we have so many concertmasters, is it's pretty rare that I get to lead, and if I do, it's usually last second. Like
Mhm.
the only times I have actually has been last second, like because somebody got sick,
Yeah.
and you know that's just the way it is. So yeah, I mean, I wish I would know more in advance, but that's yeah
Yeah.
my position right now.
Yeah. I love that analogy as the backup quarterback or something as a football fan.
Yeah,
That's wonderful.
yeah,
So moving forward a little bit. So I understand that you are very passionate about serving your community through your music. I know that you're very involved with the Renovari Ensemble, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Can you talk a little bit about what all that entails and what their mission is?
sure, yeah. So I volunteer with Renovari. A friend of mine started this organization. She's amazing. It's so amazing what she's doing in her organization. So and I'm a very small part of it that when I can I volunteer. But so she started this basically a chamber ensemble that a lot of what they do is go into prisons and teach um, string programs to inmates. Um, so here in Northeast Ohio, so there's men's correctional facility and a women's correctional prisons that they go into, and they teach. Yeah, they have these string programs that they go in every week and teach violin, viola, and cello. Rebecca is a cellist, and Lelia is a violinist. And I think they're getting a violist. So that's a lot of what they do. They have this weekly string program, and they put on concerts. Um, the inmates at like usually at Christmas and one in May, and the inmates can invite their families to come in and hear. And it's really I haven't got a chance to go to one of their concerts yet, but I've read about that and read like feedback from the inmates and how it's just really amazing, life-changing work that they're doing. So I've gone with them into the prisons. It's in one prison a number of times, and just because Rebecca asked me to, and I love that. I think that work she's doing is so beautiful. Yeah, and so again, I like to talk about what they're doing because it's amazing work. I have a very small part of it, but everybody should check it out. Maybe you could link their website or something. Yeah. So the other part of what they do, which is actually I think the first way that I got connected to them, was they put on these concerts that I can't remember exactly what they call them, but it's basically like a storytelling concert where they will work with people in the community um, who, people experiencing homelessness and a lot of disenfranchised people that might not have a voice necessarily or, you know, interact with a lot of others, the rest of society otherwise.
Yeah.
And they tell their stories. So the one that I went to was people experiencing homelessness, and they help them write songs about their experiences and how they, their life story basically, and it's just really incredibly beautiful. And that one that I went to was very moving for me and my wife, and that's after that is when I kind of got involved going with them into the prisons every once in a while. So yeah, I think those are the two main things that they do is like kind of community engagement with the storytelling concerts, and then the teaching in the prisons. So
Yeah, and that's really so wonderful because I think during the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of musicians especially had this existential crisis almost about what their purpose in society is if, if all we do is music. But with something like that, I feel like it's very explicit. Like we have a purpose and it's, it can be something like, sharing music with people that otherwise might not be able to access it. And I mean, that's such a beautiful thing. I think it's such a it should be a priority for all of us as musicians to take on that responsibility to whatever degree. So that's really it's really beautiful.
Yeah, those ladies really inspire me with the work that they're doing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, and I think Rebecca and I overlapped 1 year at CIM, and I think she had already sort of started that program, but I just love how that how that's grown now. So it's really
Yeah.
wonderful. Yeah. Well, this has been really insightful and just really fun. Before we go, do you have any final words of wisdom for our audience, especially the younger ones that may be trying to cultivate their own passion for music?
Sure. Yeah. I guess depending on kind of the age group, I'll give maybe some different advice. So like I would say if somebody's young, middle school or high school and considering going into music or maybe has child that's that age considering studying classical music. I think, well, first of all, I'll say I think studying music is one of the best things you can do it for yourself as a human being. I mean, music is, I think, gives us so much in so many different ways, and it's so valuable. But that being said, in terms of going into music as a profession, I think you need to have your eyes as wide open as you can. I think I would give the advice of somebody considering going into music, be realistic about what the career options look like, and try to get advice from teachers to that effect. Like, what does it really look like to be a professional, musician? And I think I think that teachers need to be honest with students and like where their level is, and not that anybody can, everybody has potential to work super hard and, raise their level. But you need to, I think people need to be realistic about their expectations. I think way too many people, the violinists especially, in conservatories think that they're going to be the next Itzhak Perlman or whatever your favorite violin soloist is, and the reality is it's not. It's just not going to happen for most people. There's so many incredible players out there. So my point with all that is that it's not an easy profession to go into, so you need to be aware. And along with that, I try to tell people as much as possible to avoid taking on large amounts of debt, especially in pursuing a music career, just because of the how hard it can be to make a living. So that's one. But with that, a lot of times I would encourage people who are really good, instrumentalists or musicians to, if they have, let's say they decide, I love music, but I'm not necessarily going to go into it professionally. Well, like, keep it up and do everything you can in college and beyond to keep it up, because it's such a gift, and it's like, what better thing could you be doing with your time? Like, not many things. So I think, I understand for some people it can be very difficult to not give it 100%, and not maybe be playing to the level that they could. But I think it to, even if somebody's not going to go professionally, find a way that you can enjoy making music, and that will really serve you well. To people taking auditions, if somebody is, considering an orchestral career, I would say study the orchestra you're trying to get into. Like, when I was in Cleveland, we talked about listening to the orchestra a lot. And other than that, don't try not to put too much emotional weight into any one audition, because auditions are brutal. Like, it's kind of like going on the international tennis tour, like, luckily we only have to win, you only have to win one audition. Like, the guys that are on the tennis tour, they win one tournament and then they're like, oh, well, my goal is to win more tournaments. But in a lot of ways, it's kind of similar to that. So it can feel like that when you're trying to win an audition. So yeah, I guess and also, yeah, don't do too many auditions, I would say. There's a balance, like everybody's different, but I think it's really easy to get burned out, especially if you're really emotionally invested in one. Like it can be really hard to, lose one and pick up and try again. So I think I would advise against doing, tons and tons of auditions like all right in a row. I think it's not necessarily going to be the most helpful thing. Maybe mock auditions would be more helpful. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's really great because I think, especially when you're younger, you tend to kind of romanticize what music can be, and maybe sometimes teachers aren't as, you know, real with certain students depending on the teacher. But and sometimes it's just like you gotta just kind of have this heart to heart. It's like, hey, this is like probably what you're gonna do. So like just focus on that. Don't try to do things that are beyond, your control, basically, So
Right.
yeah. Well, this has been really fun. Stephen, thank you so much for coming on today. And we wish you nothing but just continued joy in music and in the Cleveland Orchestra.
Thanks, Shin Young. Nice to be here.